I'm Beth Pariseau, Senior News Writer at Tech Target, and this is IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. Brian Jack is Chief Information Security Officer and Data Protection Officer at KnowBe4, a security awareness training software vendor based in Clearwater, Florida. The company made headlines in July when it thwarted an attempt by a North Korean nation-state attacker to infiltrate its software engineering staff. The company did hire the attacker, who used the stolen identity of a U.S. citizen and deepfake images to get through the vetting process, but detected suspicious activity on his account and contained the threat before the attacker gained access to any company data. According to a company blog about the incident, quote, "The case highlights the critical need for more robust vetting processes, continuous security monitoring, and improved coordination between HR, IT, and security teams in protecting against advanced persistent threats," end quote. So thanks for being with us, Brian.
No problem. Thanks, Beth.
All right. So can you elaborate on that point about closer communications between teams? What's changed at KnowBe4 along those lines?
Sure. So at KnowBe4, we work really well across teams already, especially between the technology teams. So traditionally, you might think InfoSec team would work really well with engineering and InfoSec would work really well with IT, but you don't often hear about InfoSec working directly with HR on their hiring practices. It's kind of this little bit of a gap. So what I mean and what specifically we've done is we've increased the amount of, we'll call it human fraud detection, in terms of looking at aspects of resumes, looking at the way that we were checking references, and some of the indicators that came up as part of really digging into this particular threat. We were able to determine that there were some things that were kind of common that you might see that might raise a little suspicion around when you get a resume and that might be not who it says it is. So that's kind of what we're talking about. We're working on opening lines of communication between the actual hiring team, the ones doing the resume screening, and trying to teach them some of the things about what to look out for, whether it's this specific threat or some of the other hiring fraud type threats, because this isn't the only one that's out there. This is just the one getting the latest buzz.
Right. Anything you could share with the audience about what to look for along those lines?
Sure. So we've found that a lot of times the resumes will be pretty, I like to think of it as hollow, meaning that they have created a persona that technically knows what they're doing and how to do the job, but there isn't much around the person. There isn't much around personal interests. There isn't much around extracurricular things. They don't really elaborate on, college. College will just say where they went, the years, the degree. It's a very interesting way of looking at resumes, and none of it is 100%, but in combination with looking at, do they have a social media presence? Do they have a LinkedIn? If they have a LinkedIn profile, what does it look like? Those also appear. If they appear pretty hollow, meaning that they have some connections, but they're not creating a lot of content. They're not liking a lot of things. It just seems like you can't really figure out who this person is. When you bring those things together, one big thing that we've been looking for is that the phone numbers they use are generally associated with voice over IP. So it's not going to be a cell phone. It's not going to be a landline. This is not, again, it's not a 100% indicator, but more times than not, that will be one of the things that you can do just to raise a little suspicion. It makes you think a little more about why I need to check this resume a little closer.
Okay. So what technical tools helped in this process? Can you kind of walk me through how this unfolded in the SOC?
Sure. So this was a pretty run-of-the-mill detection of malware attempting to execute. Most EDR platforms, endpoint detection platforms out there, are going to detect when malware is attempting to be run. So our standard laptop that we send someone who's going to be doing this type of work is a MacBook. And on the MacBook, we have EDR software. We have DLP software. These come as part of a standard baseline. So if you are doing secure baselines of your standard images for Windows, you're going to want to have this in place. Some companies don't put as much effort into Macs. They think Macs might come out of the box a little bit more inherently secure. They're not wrong, but you still need all of the other endpoint protection in place. Malware exists for a Mac, so you're going to need endpoint software. So we delivered a laptop. We sent the laptop to an address in the US. This was a US-based remote job. It was signed for by an individual. The machine came online the next day because we have the full logs of what happened. The person was really only able to, by the time that we got the detection, it was 25 minutes later, we had locked the machine. So we saw leading up to this that they had opened the laptop, they had logged in, they had logged into Slack, which is our communication tool that we use, and they had attempted to copy files to the device with a USB stick, but because our default configuration on these devices is to block USB storage, which again, that should be part of your default security baseline that you send on all machines, this person had to get a little bit creative. And what I mean by this person is it wasn't actually the person that we interviewed or the person who was going for the job. This is a person known as a laptop farm operator. So this is generally a US-based person that is receiving the corporate laptops for these individuals. They are connecting them to it's not a very elaborate, we'll call it a pretty good home network setup. That's got things like network-based KVM. It's got VPN software running so that it will allow for a remote connection from overseas into this apartment where they will then remotely connect into the different corporate laptops to do the work. So this guy who received the laptop was, we believe, trying and failing to get the necessary remote connection software installed. And so he was trying to escalate his privileges in order to get around. So he was actually, this malware was looking for cookies or sessions or things that might have been saved in the browser that he could then use to escalate his privileges. Maybe someone IT left a privileged account on the machine that they could use to install their software. So instead of a USB stick, they actually went to using SCP in an attempt to copy files from another network device on their LAN, which happened to be a Raspberry Pi running something called Tiny Pilot, which is a network-based KVM. And this is how they hide the fact, if you're looking in your EDR logs, you won't see a virtual mouse or a virtual keyboard. You won't see necessarily an RDP session or a VNC session. It's a very different signature that you have to look out for when you're detecting these. It's usually just web traffic or DNS traffic that might indicate that something is different here. So in our case, we noticed in the logs it was something called Tiny Pilot, which we later found out was one of these IP network-based KVMs that doesn't leave very much of a signature. The way we detected it, the EDR threw an alert for malware attempting to execute. We hopped on that software and started to look at the detection information. It had indicated that it was this file attempting to be run, this sort of session stealer, and it had indicated that they had copied this over using SCP from another local machine. This is just not common to see. This is not something a new hire should be doing. Anybody should be doing without IT's authorization, especially within a couple minutes of turning the machine on. And the way that we got the detection, it actually called one of the analysts because this was after hours. So the analyst called, he escalated it, he said, this is weird. So one of the SOC managers, he reached out over Slack and said, hey, what's going on? I just tried to have a conversation with the person about, hey, do you know that malware tried to just run? Like, what's going on? And his story was really pretty bogus. He said, I'm trying to troubleshoot a speed issue with my router. And we said, oh, well, what's the problem? They said, well, I was following a guide and then it downloaded this file. And we said, well, where's the guide? Send us a link to the guide. Like, let's help you. And he said, no, no, no. And so when we offered to actually get on a Slack huddle to actually talk it over, they declined. They said, no, I can't do that right now. So we said, okay, well, we're going to network contain your machine. And you should probably email your manager that says you're not going to be able to start onboarding tomorrow. And they said, well, they made up some bogus story about their wife was having heart trouble and had to go to the hospital, but in their HR record, they're listed as single. It just became a more bogus story at that point.
Wow.
But it was a pretty run-of-the-mill, we got an alert, we followed up, it was suspicious, network contained the machine, and then we just continued our investigation using the logs that we had. We went back and did a full investigation into what did they do, did they access their own email inbox? What were all the IPs? When they did the Zoom interview, what IP did they come from? When they accessed the HR system to put in their information for benefits or anything like that, which they declined. IPs were very consistent coming from a location where we had sent the laptop. So it was really interesting detection. We didn't see anything overseas. Everything came from a location that it should have been coming from, but it was pretty routine.
Is that where the voice over IP comes in because it's easier to obfuscate your location?
I think the voice over IP phone numbers are because they can programmatically route those where they need to route them. It's relatively easy to actually route that call and those SMS to, voicemails and SMS. They can actually route them and you can get them in email. It's, I think, easier to conduct the fraud with a phone number that you can route where that information is going. So if you have a phone overseas or you have a computer, you can have a US based phone number and your computer can be in China or in Vietnam, and you'll receive that phone call if you have it configured correctly.
Wow. So obviously, as a security company, KnowBe4 is going to be a pretty nice target for someone with this kind of plan in mind. Are there takeaways for security pros in general from this incident? Is this a common thing? Or is it more likely to happen to a company in your market and there are more common things that people need to prepare for?
From our understanding, it is more common than people think or want to believe.
Hmm.
The government has been writing about this threat for several years.
Yeah.
They have arrested several people, US based persons operating these laptop farms. There was a woman in Arizona, there was recently a man in Tennessee.
Wow.
We suspect that soon there will be quite a few more as we've raised the awareness. More and more people are wising up to having hired someone that they maybe haven't fully vetted and might be part of this scheme as well. We actually had somebody at Black Hat come up and say, because of your blog post and the picture, we realized we hired the same guy.
Oh my God.
Because we were talking about it, we actually are getting people to take some action,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. That's the whole point of raising awareness around a particular topic.
Mm.
I think that if you're not looking out for this, you really should be. It's very common. If you had 1,000 resumes being submitted for a particular tech position, a remote technology position, you very, very likely have resumes in there from North Korean IT workers.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like it's a threat that might be growing because of the growth in remote work, right? I mean, makes it more possible,
It is. This doesn't work on site. That's
right?
the one thing. If you have on site workers, they're not trying to do that. One of the things that doesn't get talked about. So, our story happened to be with a position that was full time, salaried, remote tech position.
Mm.
There are places that do contract IT work, or they'll outsource IT, or they'll outsource development. You outsource it to a company who has staff that you haven't vetted.
Wow.
So often those contractors are placed as either staff augmentation or they're placed on a contract to do development work and they're given access via this contracting or independent consulting company. And that's a lot of times how they're getting access or they're conducting the work. The main idea behind the scheme is to make money
Mm-hmm.
and send it back to North Korea.
Oh,
That's the main part of the scheme. The side part is that they have access and the access could be given to other more offensive threats within North Korea that they can share that access if needed, but the main goal is to make money.
yeah.
So these guys will do the work, they'll do the contracting work, they'll try to stay under the radar and not get fired. It's a real strange one.
Right. So there are so many things in flux right now, whether it's the nature of work with remote work post pandemic or new types of cloud technologies that SecOps professionals have to learn about and secure along with traditional resources. Given you're a veteran CISO, what do you think the general state is of SecOps in the industry? And how can the industry get to being more proactive than reactive?
I've actually built out an operations or an engineering team within InfoSec who has the capability to write our own tooling.
Mm.
So if we need something automated, if we need a script, if we have a problem that isn't solved by something out in the industry or something in the industry is too costly, we have to meet FedRAMP. So we like a service, but it's not FedRAMP, so we can't use it. So we have to self-host something. We have this team of operations folks who think of them as like site reliability engineers or platform engineers. I think SecOps in general, that you should maybe have the capabilities on your team to script something up. to hit an API or to augment data that's coming in to a SIM or a SOC, or to automate that first step of following up on an alert. And your analyst will be happier. You'll be able to respond faster. And it's just a quicker, less menial type of thing. I think that's a good state of SecOps, is you should be thinking more about your team's skill set and their ability to solve their own problems through code. We like to say, I'm looking for people that can identify a problem and realize that that is something they can solve with code
Ah.
or automation. And so I try to find that mindset even in SOC analysts, even in my compliance and assurance team. I want them to approach the problem not first as I want to go out and acquire a tool for this. It's how can I do this faster? How can I do this easier or better? How can I automate this? And is that something that I can just write myself, just to gain that skill set or that ability on their own to do it?
Is it tough to find those kinds of skills among security analysts?
It used to be. And I think that we have found some success in not necessarily finding someone with a deep security skill set.
Ah.
I think there's a lot of security basics or infosec basics that if you're looking for someone that can do SecOps, and I think that you can teach a lot of the security things. They can get a certification, they can learn from a really robust team. What's needed is that mindset of, I'm going to figure it out. I can solve this with code. And then as long as you have a good competency of security in the team, those individuals will learn those different aspects of security that are necessary in that role. So the operations team, they're not the ones that are responding to the alerts. They're not the ones that are setting security policy or anything like that. They're the internal tooling team, much like a miniature development or engineering team, but they're focused on InfoSec problems.
Ah, okay.
By the nature of it, they need to know InfoSec, but it's not something that they have to have years of experience on their resume for. I'm looking for a particular mindset of someone who can figure it out and solve problems. Once we switched that up and started looking for that type of individual instead of somebody that was specifically doing security automation and more, well, I've been doing engineering automation and I'm interested in security, that we found more success in finding candidates.
That's really interesting. Is there a way that that ties back to the North Korea issue?
Not necessarily, other than there doesn't exist a tool. For instance, I talked about voice over IP numbers and resumes. So we use one of these hiring platforms, all the resumes and everything flow into, and it has an API. And I thought, well, how can I make this easier so that the hiring staff doesn't have to manually take a phone number and type it into a system and look to see if it's VoIP or if it's cell phone or something like that? How can we automate this for them? You just need to know some intermediate Python and have the right API keys to hit the necessary services. And you're talking a week's worth of work or less. And now you have a system that can automatically screen and augment applicant records with the type of phone carrier that's listed on there, that they've listed as their phone number. And you can just flag it. Oh, this resume is a little suspicious. It has an indicator. Something to make it automated, make it scale. I mean, we have a position open. We have 2,000 resumes. The position's been open for a week.
Wow.
I am not sure how you manually scan that at any sort of reasonable pace. So this is a sort of thing where it's solving different problems through just a little bit of code. Python is an almost necessary skill set for almost any position, or even a position outside of InfoSec or IT, and you know a little bit of how to get around in Python and solve some problems through automation. I think that you will be more successful. And then add AI to it, especially if you can write Python to talk to AI. Now you're getting into some interesting territory.
Yeah, do you think AI will play a role in SecOps in the future?
I think AI will play a role in just about everything. And I think that if you're not thinking that it is going to be a bit of a game changer, and you're not thinking of how you can apply the latest AI advances to maybe not necessarily what you're doing right now, but what you want to do next year, it needs to be in your list of technologies that you're using. Right now, it's tricky. We're all sort of figuring out how to use it safely. How to use it as doesn't get biased, how to use it where we're not leaking information out to third parties that we don't want to. So you need to have strong policy and strong controls around it, but you definitely have to be thinking about how to incorporate that in your roadmap of things that you want to improve in the next couple of years.
Right, because as we saw in this incident with the North Korean worker, they're using AI. They use deepfake, right, to spoof an image.
They did. Now, I'll clarify, it wasn't on any part of their application. On their application, they provided, as part of photo identification, was a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
The driver's license was, now we know, it's really, really well done. That was not done with AI. It's just a pure fake ID.
Mm-hmm.
It was a real ID that they had swapped a picture on, but they'd done it in such a really good way that to the naked eye, you couldn't tell that anything was off there. It looked valid. The photo that was doctored was what they had provided as part of onboarding to use inside of the HRIS system or to use on Slack. And we looked at that. I did a webinar last week with KnowBe4, and we talked a little bit about that. The host, Perry Carpenter, he actually showed where that original stock image came from and that it's used everywhere. It's actually one of the most popular hits if you search for business executive stock photos. It's like number one. It's the picture for a pediatrician, for a board member, and you start to get really suspicious of these companies if you see that picture now, and you do a Google reverse image search, and you'll see all the places. Now you start to get suspicious of that business that's using that picture because they're saying that picture represents a real person, and it is a real person, but it's not the person that they say it is. It actually came from a LinkedIn case study a while ago. There's actually a video of the guy, so he's a real person. I hope he knows that he's really famous now. But
Wow.
yeah.
Well, anything that I haven't thought to ask you about you want to mention here?
This particular threat is here. It's been here for years. I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Just like any other threat or threat actor, their tactics will change as we progress. They have people working with them in the US to run laptop farms. They have people working with them in the US to use their identity. They have found people in the US to pose as them in person, to pick up equipment from an office in person, to do drug screenings in person. If the position really warrants it, they will go to great lengths to secure that role. As you can imagine, the salary for a senior level engineer based in the US is worth it. That's a lot of money, and money is always a huge motivator. So they can be very advanced in the way that they secure these jobs. So we have to get people aware of what to look out for and some techniques to try to root it out. We don't want to be involved in sanctions and talking with the Department of Justice about and being involved in funneling money. No business wants that. So we just got to be aware of the topic and what to look out for. And hopefully more places will come out and say, oh, yep, that happened to us. Here's what happened, so that other people can learn and we can adapt to the changing threat landscape.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story with us, and hopefully it will be helpful for others to be warned.
I hope so.
Thank you very much, Brian.
All right. Thanks, Beth.
This has been IT Ops Query Season 2, The State of SecOps. If you have any feedback on this episode or want to share questions, comments, or stories we should consider covering, please reach out to me at B as in boy, P as in Peter, A-R, I, S as in Samuel, E-A-U at techtarget.com. Please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to this podcast on your platform of choice. And tune in next week for our continued conversations with industry experts about the challenges facing security operations. Thank you for being with us so far.